The Hook mystery begins. The night was cold on the far edge of the human colony. Wind moved through the thin metal walls of the small house, making soft rattling sounds. Inside, Daniel sat alone at his table, eating a late dinner. The rest of the colony had gone quiet hours ago. But Daniel liked the silence. He could hear the hum of the heater, the ticking of the clock, and nothing else, until a sound came that didn't belong. It was soft at first, almost like scratching. Then it became a faint tapping. Daniel froze, fork halfway to his mouth. The sound came again, slow, uneven. Not like the wind, not like an animal, something or someone was outside. He pushed his chair back and stood up. The sound stopped. Daniel waited, listening. A minute passed, then another. Silence returned, and he almost sat down again. But then, he heard it. A small, quick breath. Someone was out there, hiding. Daniel walked to the door. He opened it slowly, the cold air rushing in. At first, he saw nothing but the dark outline of the empty street. The weak colony lights flickered in the distance. Then he noticed a shape in the shadows near the side wall. Small, crouched, unmoving. "Hello?" He called. No answer. He stepped out, boots crunching on the dirt. The figure shifted, pressing back against the wall. The movement caught the light, and Daniel saw her face, or at least part of it. She wasn't human. Her skin was pale, with a faint blue tint. Her eyes were too large for her thin face, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her hair was tangled, falling over her shoulders like dark threads. She was breathing fast, as if she had been running for a long time. Daniel raised his hand slowly, showing he had no weapon. "I won't hurt you," he said. His voice calm, still. She didn't move. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. She looked scared, hungry, and ready to run. That's when Daniel noticed her hands clutching her stomach. She was trembling. Her clothes were torn and dirty. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She blinked, not understanding the words. Daniel tapped his stomach and made an eating motion with his hand. Her eyes followed the motion, and she nodded slowly. But when he stepped toward the door, she flinched back. She didn't trust him yet. Daniel stopped, keeping his distance. "Wait here," he said softly. He went inside and grabbed what was left of his dinner, some bread, a piece of roasted meat, and a small bottle of water. When he came back, she was still there, watching him carefully. He set the food on the ground and stepped back. She hesitated for a moment, then crawled forward and picked it up. She ate quickly, her hands shaking. Daniel could hear the small sounds she made, soft hums between bites. He noticed she didn't just swallow the food. She savored it, as if each bite was precious. When she drank the water, she closed her eyes, relief spreading over her face. Daniel sat down on the steps, not too close. He didn't want to scare her away. "Where are you from?" he asked, knowing she couldn't answer. Still, she looked at him for a moment, then pointed into the dark beyond the colony. Her finger trembled, and her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Fear, maybe sadness, before Daniel could ask more. She stood. She took a small step back into the shadows. Then she turned and ran. "Wait!" Daniel called, but she didn't stop. Her small figure vanished into the night. Swallowed by the darkness, Daniel sighed and started to go inside. That's when he saw it, lying on the ground where she had been, a small pendant, no bigger than a coin. It was made of a metal he didn't recognize. It glowed faintly with a soft blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. He picked it up and turned it in his hand. The glow seemed to respond to his touch. Daniel didn't know what it was, but he had the feeling this wasn't the last time he would see the alien girl. Somehow he knew this was only the beginning, the first choice. Daniel could not sleep that night. The image of the alien girl's pale, frightened face stayed in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her clutching her stomach, shaking, and every time he thought of her running into the cold night, his chest tightened. He kept wondering, where had she gone? Was she safe? Was she alone? The small pendant lay on the table beside his bed, glowing softly in the dark. It was like a tiny living thing, the light pulsing as if it had a heartbeat. Daniel had seen many strange objects since coming to this colony, but nothing like this. It was too perfect, too delicate. No human factory could have made it. It had to be alien, just like her by morning. The pendant's glow had faded, but it was still warm to the touch. Daniel slipped it into his pocket before heading outside. The streets were quiet, only a few early workers walking toward the transport station. The air smelled faintly of dust and metal. Beyond the colony walls, the desert stretched endlessly. Hiding whatever lay in its shadows, he went to his small workshop near the edge of town. Daniel was a repairman. He fixed machines, generators, and the occasional old Earth gadget someone brought in. But today, he couldn't focus on his work. His mind kept drifting back to the girl and to the choice he might have to make if he saw her again. By afternoon, the sun was high, and the heat shimmered on the metal roofs. Daniel stepped outside for air, wiping sweat from his forehead. That's when he saw movement near the fence. A flash of dark hair. A small figure crouched low, trying not to be seen. His heart jumped. It was her. She was peeking through the gaps in the fence, scanning the area. When her eyes met his, she froze. Daniel raised a hand slowly. This time, she didn't run. Instead, she stepped forward. Keeping her gaze locked on him, she looked even thinner than before, her clothes still torn and dusty. The sun made her skin's faint blue tint more visible. Her eyes darted around nervously. Checking if anyone else was nearby, Daniel stepped closer, but stopped a few feet away. "You came back," he said softly. Knowing she couldn't understand the words, he tapped his chest, then pointed to her. A gesture meaning "I'm glad you're here." She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to read his intention. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a small packet of food, dried fruit and bread. He placed it on the ground between them and stepped back. The girl approached slowly, eyes never leaving his face. When she knelt to pick up the food, Daniel saw her hands were scraped, small cuts running along her arms. She must have been traveling through rough terrain. She ate quickly again, though not as desperately as the night before. When she finished, she looked at him and pointed toward the pendant hanging from his pocket. Daniel took it out, holding it in his palm. Her eyes widened, and she stepped closer, touching it lightly. With her fingertips, the moment she did, the pendant's glow returned, brighter than before. The light reflected in her eyes, making them shine. She said something, a short word in her own language. It sounded musical, soft, but carried emotion. Daniel shook his head gently, showing he didn't understand. Still, he could tell it meant something important. She took a deep breath, as if making a decision, and pointed beyond the colony walls. Then she tapped her chest, then pointed at him. It was like she was asking him to follow her. Daniel hesitated. Outside the colony was dangerous. Unknown creatures, no patrols, and the constant threat of raiders. But something about her made him want to trust her. Maybe it was the way she had returned instead of running away for good. Maybe it was the strange feeling he had when she touched the pendant. Like their meeting wasn't an accident. He looked at her, then at the open desert beyond the fence. If he followed her, he could be walking into trouble. If he didn't, he might never know why she came back. It was a choice, safety or the truth. And Daniel had always been the kind of man who hated unanswered questions. "All right," he murmured, though she couldn't understand. He nodded once, firmly. Her tense expression softened slightly. She turned and moved toward a narrow gap in the fence, gesturing for him to follow. Daniel glanced back at the colony one last time before stepping through. The air outside was hotter, drier. They walked in silence, her small feet moving quickly. Over the rocky ground, Daniel kept scanning the horizon. The colony grew smaller behind them, until it was only a faint shape in the distance. After a while, he noticed the girl was slowing down, her shoulders tense. Then she stopped, looking toward a cluster of rocks ahead. Something moved there. A larger figure stepped out from the shadows. Tall, with the same pale blue skin as the girl, her hair was tied back, and her eyes were sharper, older. She wore clothes that were worn but still carried signs of careful repair. The woman looked at Daniel with a mix of suspicion and exhaustion. Then she spoke quickly to the girl in their language. The girl replied, pointing to the food in her hands, then to Daniel. The woman's gaze softened slightly, but not completely. She stepped forward and bowed her head, just a little. Then she spoke again, slower, as if trying to make him understand. Her voice was low, almost pleading. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he could read the tone. She was asking for something, and from the way she glanced back toward the rocks, Daniel knew. They were not alone. Someone else was hiding there, maybe more of them. And whatever she was asking, it was big, the kind of request that could change his life. The taller alien woman stepped out fully from behind the rocks. Her presence felt different from the girl's, not just in height, but in the way she carried herself. Her movements were careful, as if she was ready to protect the girl at any moment. Her eyes, deep and tired, studied Daniel like a puzzle she had to solve. Daniel stood still, letting her take the measure of him. He knew sudden moves might be taken as a threat. The girl stepped closer to the woman, speaking quickly in that soft musical language. The words were short but urgent, and Daniel caught his own name being repeated. It was strange to hear his name shaped by an alien tongue, like hearing something familiar in a place it didn't belong. The woman's gaze shifted to the pendant in Daniel's hand. Her eyes widened slightly. It was recognition, not surprise. She took a step forward and reached out slowly. Daniel hesitated, then placed the pendant in her palm. The blue light inside it brightened immediately. For a moment, it painted their faces in the same faint glow. The woman closed her eyes and exhaled, as if the pendant's warmth was more than just light, like it was safety or hope. When she opened her eyes again, there was less suspicion in them. She looked at Daniel and said something, a full sentence this time. Her tone was measured, calm, but Daniel could still hear the weight behind it. He shook his head. "I can't understand," he said, pointing to his ear, and then to her. She frowned, but not in anger. Instead, she glanced at the girl and gave a small nod. The girl dug into a cloth pouch at her side and pulled out a small device. It looked like a smooth stone with glowing lines running across it. She pressed it, and it hummed softly. Then she spoke into it, and a mechanical voice, slightly broken but clear, came out in common tongue. She says, "She is asking for place to stay." Daniel blinked. "Place to stay? Here? In the colony?" The girl repeated his words into the device, then waited. The woman listened to the translation and replied in her own tongue. Her voice low but steady. The device spoke again. "Yes. Safe place. For me and my child." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. The colony was small, strict, and full of rules about outsiders. Bringing them in could mean trouble, not just for him, but for the whole settlement. And yet, he looked at the girl. Her eyes still carried that same hunger. But now there was something else too. Trust. She had brought him here because she believed he could help. He asked, "Why? Why here?" The girl relayed the question, and the woman's reply came slower this time. "Our home. Gone. Burned," the device said. "Hunters search for us. We have no place." Daniel frowned. "Hunters?" The woman's eyes hardened at the word, and she spoke again, voice sharp now. The device struggled with the translation. "They kill. Take. Never stop." Daniel didn't need a perfect translation to understand. This was not just about shelter, it was about survival. If what she said was true, someone was hunting them, and if those hunters came here. He glanced over his shoulder at the open desert. The colony walls were far behind now. The heat shimmered across the horizon. No sign of danger yet, but that didn't mean it wasn't coming. The woman took a step closer, holding the pendant between them. Her eyes locked on his. "This gift," the device translated after she spoke, "you kept. Means you are good. Please." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had spent years trying to avoid trouble, keeping his life quiet and simple. Now trouble was standing right in front of him, wearing a human-like face but carrying an alien past. And he could feel it. If he said yes, nothing in his life would stay simple again. Before he could answer, a sound cut through the air, a low hum growing louder. The woman's head snapped toward the desert, her eyes narrowing. The girl grabbed her mother's arm. Speaking quickly, almost in panic, Daniel turned and saw it. Far in the distance, a faint shimmer of metal moving just above the horizon. The sunlight flashed off its surface. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't from the colony. The woman's voice dropped to a whisper, but the device still translated. "They are coming," Daniel's mind raced. If these were the hunters she spoke of, they would find her and the girl easily out here. And if they followed him back to the colony... His stomach twisted at the thought. The woman stepped closer, urgency in her voice. "Please. Decide," the device said. Her tone wasn't begging anymore. It was warning. If he refused, they would still be chased. If he agreed, he'd be pulling the danger directly into his own life. Daniel looked at the girl she was holding onto. Her mother tightly, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't speak. But the message was clear. She was asking him to be more than just the man who gave her food. She was asking him to choose a side. The hum in the distance grew louder. Daniel's choice would have to be made now. The mother's request. The humming in the distance was no longer faint. It was steady now. The sound of engines moving low over the desert. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the glinting shapes far away. They were small, but moving fast, too fast for colony patrols. And they weren't flying in a straight line. They were searching, scanning, just like the woman had said. The alien woman gripped the pendant tighter in her hand. Her knuckles turned pale. The girl stood close to her mother, her large eyes darting. Between Daniel and the approaching threat, she spoke quickly in her own language. The woman answered without looking at her. Her attention was locked on Daniel. The girl lifted the small translator device again. Her voice came out shaky in common tongue through the machine. She says, "Please, you take us. If we stay, they find us." "They take us," Daniel swallowed. "What do they want from you?" He asked. The question went through the device. And the woman's reply was short, sharp. The device clicked before speaking. "They take all, no mercy, use us. Never free." There was no need for more detail. Daniel could see it in her eyes. Whatever these hunters were, they were worse than raiders, worse than the kind of trouble that came from greed alone. This was personal, targeted. The humming sound shifted. One of the distant shapes tilted downward, moving closer to the ground. Daniel knew they didn't have much time. The woman stepped forward now. She spoke slower, her tone steady but urgent. The girl translated again. She says, "We work, help, we clean, we fix, we stay quiet. Just safe place, please." Daniel looked past them, toward the rocks where they had been hiding. There were signs now, a small bundle of cloth, the remains of a fire pit. This wasn't just a temporary stop. They had been living here, in the open desert, exposed. If the hunters had already come this close, it was only a matter of time before they found the hiding place. "You don't understand," Daniel said. "If I bring you into the colony, there will be questions. They don't like outsiders, especially aliens." The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer until they were only a few feet apart. Her gaze was steady. The pendant's blue light glowed between them. She spoke quietly, and the girl translated. She says, "She trusts you because you gave food when no one else would." Daniel's throat felt tight. He had only given the girl his leftovers, a small thing. But to them, it meant more. In that moment, he realized that for these two, trust was rare, maybe the only thing rarer than safety. Another hum cut the air, this time closer. The girl looked over her shoulder nervously. The woman reached out and touched Daniel's arm. Her grip was firm. The translator clicked. She says, "Please, decide now." Before they come, Daniel looked back toward the horizon. The metallic shapes were clearer now. Small hunter craft, hovering just above the ground. They moved in a scanning pattern. Dust trailed behind them as they swept across the desert. Like predators searching for prey, his mind raced. If he refused, they might try to run again. But how far could they get with those ships closing in? If he agreed, he would have to hide them. And once the colony authorities found out, there would be consequences. He thought about the rules, the warnings the council had repeated so many times. No alien refugees. No unregistered outsiders. All non-human contact must be reported immediately. They said it was for safety. But sometimes Daniel wondered if it was just fear wearing an official badge. The girl's voice broke through his thoughts. She says, "She will give you this." The girl pointed to the pendant in her mother's hand. She says, "It will help you one day." More than you know. Daniel hesitated. It was strange. He didn't want the pendant. He didn't want payment. What he wanted was to stop picturing the girl hiding in the cold night, clutching her stomach. What he wanted was to stop imagining what those hunter ships would do if they found her. The hum grew louder, the shadows of the ships creeping closer across the sand. Daniel made his decision. "Come on," he said, motioning toward the colony. He didn't need to use the translator. His tone said everything. The woman's shoulders eased just slightly. She gave a small nod, then called softly to someone behind the rocks. To Daniel's surprise, a very young alien child, even smaller than the girl, emerged. His legs were weak, and he clung to a ragged blanket. The girl immediately took his hand, speaking softly to calm him. Daniel's chest tightened again. It wasn't just a mother and daughter, it was a family. And now, they were his responsibility. They moved quickly, keeping low. Daniel led them along a narrow path that curved toward a rarely used maintenance gate at the colony's edge. He knew a way in that would avoid most of the patrols, a route he had used before when smuggling in supplies for friends who didn't want to pay colony taxes. As they approached the wall, the hum of the hunter craft faded slightly. But Daniel knew that was temporary. They would circle back soon. He glanced over his shoulder. The woman was still holding the pendant, her eyes scanning the skies. The girl and the small child stayed close. Every step they took was careful, quiet. When they reached the maintenance gate, Daniel keyed in his old access code. The lock clicked open. He motioned them inside. As they slipped through, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger wasn't behind them. It was ahead, waiting. Inside the colony walls, trouble arrives. The metal gate closed with a dull click behind them. For a moment, the colony walls felt like safety. But Daniel knew better. The colony could be just as dangerous as the desert, maybe more so. Here, trouble didn't always arrive with noise and engines. Sometimes it came in whispers, in suspicious glances, and once it started, it spread fast. The narrow service corridor behind the gate was dim and dusty. Few people used it, and the air smelled of rust and stale water. Daniel motioned for the woman and children to follow quietly. Their footsteps were almost silent. The smaller child clutched the girl's hand tightly. The woman kept looking over her shoulder, even inside the walls. She moved like someone expecting danger at any second. Daniel led them through winding back paths. He avoided the main streets, cutting instead between storage units and unused workshops. It was the safest way to his home without running into too many eyes. But it wasn't completely empty. Twice, they passed lone workers hauling equipment. Each time, Daniel kept walking, without slowing, and each time, he felt the weight of their curious stares. By the time they reached his street, Daniel's jaw was tight. He pushed open the door to his home and let them inside. The woman hesitated at the threshold, scanning the small space before stepping in. The girl and younger child followed quickly, their eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. "Sit," Daniel said, pointing toward the worn couch. They didn't understand the word, but they understood the gesture. The girl sat first, pulling the smaller child beside her. The woman remained standing for a moment, then finally lowered herself onto the edge of the seat. Daniel poured water into 3 cups and handed them over. The younger child drank so fast he coughed. The girl patted his back gently. Murmuring in their language, the woman drank more slowly, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. They were safe for now. But the quiet didn't last outside. A sound broke through the stillness. A sharp knock on the door across the street. Daniel glanced through his small front window. 2 colony guards were speaking to his neighbor, Mr. Harland. The conversation looked casual. But Daniel had been here long enough to know the pattern, the way the guards leaned in slightly, the way Harland's eyes kept flicking toward Daniel's house. He felt a knot form in his stomach. The woman noticed his expression. She stood, slowly, moving to the window. When she saw the guards, her grip on the pendant tightened. She spoke quickly to the girl, who immediately moved the smaller child off the couch and toward the back of the house. Daniel turned to her. "They're just talking," he said quietly, even though she couldn't understand. But the truth was, he didn't believe it himself. The guards rarely came without a reason, and if they were asking questions door to door, someone had seen something. The knock came 15 minutes later. It was firm, 3 even raps against the metal door. Daniel took a slow breath before opening it. 2 guards stood there, a tall man with sharp eyes, and a shorter woman whose gaze swept the interior of his home in a single glance. "Afternoon, Daniel," the tall guard said. "Afternoon," Daniel replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Anyone unusual come by lately?" the guard asked. "Strangers? Non-residents?" Daniel's heartbeat picked up. He kept his expression calm. "No one," he said. The shorter guard tilted her head. "Someone reported movement near the south fence," she said. Daniel shrugged. "Probably one of the kids. Chasing a ball." The tall guard's eyes stayed locked on him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "All right. Let us know if you see anything." They turned and walked away. Daniel closed the door slowly. The moment the latch clicked, the woman appeared from the hallway. Her face was tense, her voice low. The girl hurried to translate. "She says, they are looking for us." Daniel already knew. The hunters weren't the only danger. Now the colony itself was becoming a threat. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The woman sat in a corner of the living room, still holding the pendant. The girl slept curled beside the smaller child. Every now and then, Daniel heard the faint hum of engines outside the colony walls. The hunters hadn't given up, and if the guards started working with them, it would be over. The next morning, the trouble grew. When Daniel stepped outside to get supplies, he felt the shift immediately. People were looking at him longer than usual. Some didn't speak at all, just glanced his way and whispered to whoever stood next to them. At the market, he overheard part of a conversation. "They say he's hiding something. Saw him near the fence yesterday." By midday, he knew the whispers had spread far. In a place as small as the colony, rumors traveled faster than truth, and once a story started, it was nearly impossible to stop. When he returned home, the woman met him at the door. She says, "We should leave," the girl translated. Daniel shook his head. "You won't make it far. The hunters are still out there," the girl relayed his words. The woman frowned but said nothing. Instead, she set the pendant on the table between them. It glowed faintly. She says, "This is yours now. If you help us," the girl said. Daniel stared at the pendant. He didn't know what it really was, but something about it felt important, and deep down, he understood the meaning behind the gesture. If she was giving this to him, it meant she was placing her life, and the lives of her children, in his hands. Outside, a distant hum filled the air again. Daniel froze. It wasn't the colony patrol this time. It was lower, heavier, and it was getting closer. The hunters had arrived. The hum grew louder with each passing second. It wasn't the steady patrol sound Daniel had grown used to over the years. This was heavier, deeper, a sound that seemed to press against the walls, somewhere in his bones. Daniel knew. The hunters were close. The woman stood from her seat in the corner, her eyes locked on the window. She didn't need the translator to understand what that sound meant. The girl clutched the smaller child, her gaze flicking from her mother To Daniel, her breathing quickened. Even the air inside the house felt heavier now. Daniel moved to the window and pulled the curtain just enough to see outside. Down the street, people were gathering. Most of them were looking toward the colony gates. Over the rooftops he saw it. Dark shapes hovering beyond the wall. 3. Hunter craft, matte black with narrow wings and a strange glow along their undersides. They floated low, moving slowly, like wolves circling prey. The woman came to stand beside him. She spoke quietly in her language. The girl lifted the translator. She says, "They will search. They will ask questions if they find us here. No one will stop them." Daniel knew she was right. The colony guards wouldn't fight the hunters. They'd hand her over to avoid trouble. It was the same every time an outside force applied pressure. The council would say it was for the safety of the colony, but really, it was just fear. The hum grew closer. Daniel stepped back from the window, his mind racing. He thought about the rules. He thought about the whispers he'd heard at the market. He thought about the smaller child hiding his face in his sister's lap if he hid. Them and got caught. The council could strip him of his home. He could lose his workshop. He could be banned from the colony entirely. But if he turned them over... He looked at the girl. She stared back at him, her eyes wide but steady. In those eyes, Daniel saw the same thing he'd seen the night they met. Hunger, yes, but also trust. Trust he hadn't asked for. Trust he wasn't sure he deserved. The woman stepped forward, holding the pendant in her hand. It glowed faintly, the light pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm. She pressed it into his palm and closed his fingers around it. She says, "You keep this, you keep it safe." "And us too," the girl translated. Daniel opened his hand and stared at the pendant. It felt warm against his skin. He didn't know why, but part of him believed her, that it was more than just an ornament, that it meant something important. But in this moment, it wasn't about the pendant. It was about choosing a side. Outside, voices were getting louder. Daniel heard boots on the dirt street. A man shouted orders, not a colony guard voice, deeper, harsher. He risked another glance out the window and saw them, hunters. 3 of them walking side by side, armored dark and reflective, helmets shaped like the heads of insects, weapons slung across their backs. They were going door to door, not rushing, taking their time, like they already knew their prey had nowhere to go. Daniel's heart pounded. His home was only 6 doors down from where they were now. He didn't have much time. The woman's voice broke the silence. The girl lifted the translator again. She says, "If you say no, we will leave now. We will take our chance outside." Daniel stared at her. "You won't make it," he said quietly. The girl relayed the words. The woman's jaw tightened. Her eyes flipped toward the smaller child. She says, "Better we die free than be taken," the translator said. The weight of the choice pressed on Daniel like a physical force. He thought of the rules again. The guards, the colony council. He thought of the hunters only a few doors away. And he thought of the moment. 2 nights ago, when a starving alien girl had looked up at him and accepted food from his hands without fear. Daniel's mind made the decision before his voice did. "Follow me," he said. The girl didn't wait for a translation. She grabbed the smaller child and stood. The woman was already moving. Daniel led them to the back of the house. He knelt beside an old storage unit against the wall and pulled it open. Behind the shelves, there was a narrow panel. He pulled it away to reveal a hidden compartment. It wasn't big, barely enough for 2 adults if they squeezed. But it was dark and quiet. "You'll be safe here," he said. The girl translated quickly. The woman ducked inside first, pulling the children in after her. Daniel slid the panel back into place. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a wall with a shelf. The knock came almost instantly after, hard, sharp, 3 times. "Daniel!" A voice called. It wasn't the colony guards. It was deeper, colder. "We have questions." Daniel stepped to the door. His hand rested on the latch for a long moment. Then he opened it. 3 hunters stood there, their black armor gleaming faintly in the afternoon light. One of them tilted his head. "Have you seen outsiders?" The hunter asked, his voice coming through a filter. "Non-humans." Daniel kept his expression neutral. "No," he said. The hunter's helmeted head turned slightly, scanning the inside of the house. For a moment, Daniel was sure they could hear his heartbeat. Then the lead hunter stepped back. "If you see anything, you tell us," he said. It wasn't a question, it was an order. They turned and moved on. Daniel closed the door and leaned against it. The hum of the hunter craft still filled the air outside. But for now, the house was quiet. For now, they were safe. But Daniel knew this was only the first test. The cliffhanger ending, the hunter's footsteps faded slowly into the distance. Daniel stayed by the door for a long moment, his ear pressed against the cold metal. Only when he was sure they were gone did he step back. The house was silent, too silent. Daniel's eyes moved to the back wall. The storage shelves looked exactly as they had before. He crossed the room, crouched down, and slid the panel open. Inside, the woman sat with her knees drawn up, the children pressed close against her. The girl's eyes blinked against the light spilling in. The smaller child clung to her arm, still shaking from the knock. "They're gone," Daniel said softly. The girl didn't need the translator for that. She let out a small breath and turned to her mother. The woman's shoulders loosened, but her eyes still held the same sharp alertness. They climbed out of the hiding space one by one. Daniel helped the smallest child step down. He poured them water and pushed what food he had left across the table. The woman murmured something low to the girl. The girl lifted the translator. "She says, 'Thank you,'" Daniel nodded. He wanted to say "Don't thank me yet," but kept the words to himself. This wasn't over, not even close. Outside, the hum of the hunter craft had moved farther away, but it was still in the air. Like a storm that refused to pass, Daniel knew they'd be back. Hunters didn't stop until they found what they were after. The woman seemed to sense it too. She stood by the window, looking through a narrow gap in the curtain. Her hands never left the pendant. The soft blue light reflected faintly on her skin. Daniel joined her through the gap. He saw a small group of colony guards gathered near the end of the street. They weren't patrolling, they were talking, and one of them was pointing toward Daniel's house. His stomach tightened. The guards weren't hunters, but they could be worse in their own way. If they decided he was hiding something, they wouldn't hesitate to search the place. And once they found the woman and her children, the woman turned from the window and spoke to the girl. She says, "We may have to leave soon," the translator said. Daniel frowned. "Where would you go?" "The hunters are still out there," the girl repeated his words. The woman's reply was short. She says, "There is one place they cannot follow." Daniel looked at her carefully. "What place?" he asked. The woman hesitated. Her eyes searched his face as if weighing whether to trust him with the answer. Finally, she spoke. She says, "Old tunnels under the desert. Built long ago." Daniel had heard rumors of such tunnels, relics from the early days of the colony. Maybe even older. Some said they were dangerous, unstable. Others claimed they led to places the colony council didn't want people to find. He was about to ask more when the knock came. Loud, sharp, 3 times. The girl's head jerked toward the door. The smaller child grabbed her arm, eyes wide with fear. Daniel's pulse quickened. The hunters wouldn't knock twice in one day, which meant this time it was the guards. The woman stepped toward the hiding place again, but Daniel raised a hand. "Wait," he said. He moved to the door and pressed his ear against it. He could hear voices, not one, but several. The tone wasn't casual. They weren't here for a friendly visit. When he opened the door, 3 guards stood on his porch. Behind them, 2 more waited in the street. The tallest guard, the one who had spoken to him yesterday, stepped forward. "Daniel," he said, "we need to come inside." Daniel's hand tightened on the edge of the door. "Why?" The guard's expression didn't change. "We've had reports of unusual activity in this area." He leaned slightly to one side, glancing past Daniel into the house. Just a routine check. Daniel felt the woman's presence behind him. Before he saw her, she was standing in the hallway, mostly hidden. But if the guards stepped inside, they would see her instantly. "I'm busy," Daniel said. Keeping his voice even, the guard took a slow step forward. "This won't take long." For a moment, Daniel's mind raced. He could step aside, let them in, end this before it got worse. That was the safe choice for him, the selfish one. But as he looked at the woman's face, and at the two children peeking from behind her legs, he knew he wouldn't do it. "You can't come in without a search order," Daniel said. The guard's eyes narrowed. "We can get one," he replied. "And when we do, if we find something, it will go badly for you." They stared at each other for a long, heavy moment. Then the guard stepped back. "We'll be back," he said. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. Daniel closed the door and locked it. The woman asked something quickly, her voice tight. The girl translated. She says, "What did they want?" Daniel sighed. "They're coming back," the girl relayed his words. The woman nodded once, her expression grim. "They will search," she said through the translator, "and they will bring the hunters with them." Daniel didn't ask how she knew. She just did. And that meant the decision he had made earlier wasn't enough anymore. If he kept them here, the guards and hunters would find them. If they ran into the open desert, the hunters would find them there, too, which left only one option, the one the woman had mentioned. The tunnels, dangerous, unknown. But maybe, just maybe, a way out. Daniel looked at her. "Tomorrow," he said. "We move tomorrow." The woman nodded once. The children didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone, and in their eyes, Daniel saw it again, that trust he hadn't asked for, and now couldn't walk away from. That night, Daniel sat alone at his table. The pendant lay in front of him. Its blue light pulsed slowly in the dark. Outside, somewhere beyond the colony walls, the hum of hunter engines drifted through the air. Closer than before. They hadn't gone far. They were waiting, watching, hunting. And Daniel had just promised to lead their prey into the desert.